What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield holding it down for us in the other DraftKings Boston studio here. It's the Dark Angel version of the studio there.
I'm scared.
Sleek and deadly. A little scary. A lot of dark colors around there, very ominous. We hope Jesse's going to survive. Lift her up in prayer. We have a great show for you guys. We are brought to you by Wrangler, made for the ride of life. Save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order with promo code GOJO15. Got a great show for you as always. Download, subscribe, rate, review. Leave us a 5-star rating and watch us. Check us out live here Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on the DraftKingsNetwork.com, DraftKings YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and more. Peter Burns from the SEC Network going to join us here to talk about everything going on there, Dad. You might have the leading Heisman candidate in the Southeastern Conference after Jaden Daniels set some offensive records for LSU this weekend. Texas A&M and Mississippi State have now both fired their head coaches. Dad, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm a little worried this is like a Final Destination thing where everybody connected with that Texas A&M Mississippi State game is now going to lose their job in some fashion after this game, which would mean I'm on the chopping block here soon.
Either that or wherever you go to do a game, those teams are on the chopping block. What do you have this week? Iowa State and Texas. So, I mean, maybe some personnel on those teams, not necessarily head coaches, better be careful because GoJo's coming to town, and that means, he's bringing the guillotine with him. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We also have to wait and see if we're going to get a live guest this week. You're going to become an uncle again this week. I'm going to become a grandfather again this week. So it's going to happen this week, we believe. Your sister Sydney is ready to go.
Is today the due date?
I think today or tomorrow is the due date. So wow. We are all waiting on pins and needles. No one more than Sydney as I have never been pregnant, nor you, Mike. Jesse, you have. I'm sure at the end of this, you're ready to go and ready to be done with this thing. It isn't the most probably thing that first-time moms think is they're going to have the baby on time, and a lot of time it's past. It comes late.
Yeah, I think you have all this anxiety about, like, once you hit 36 weeks, they tell you the baby can come at any time. So you're like, oh my God, like I got to be ready, blah, blah, blah. And then normally it doesn't happen. It comes late. So I think that's a first baby thing. I don't know. But yeah, I would be really surprised. I think it's probably going to be a couple days. It's her first, so.
When you say
exactly
when the baby
kind
comes
of nightmare
late,
scenario that my sister's imagining there, who's so ready to be done with this, so over being pregnant. Exactly what every person nearing that 9-month mark wants to hear is, oh, don't worry, it's probably going to take even longer.
Yeah.
But Mike, who do you feel worse for in this situation, Sydney or her husband Ben? Or mom. I would say, Mom. Well, Ben is in the area. I remember I got, kind of scratched and pulled on, because I'm right there. Mom's not going to be in the delivery room. Ben is. And I feel bad for Ben. Big, tough football player now in med school. He's going to get abused if this baby is late.
Yeah, he will, but it's...
Yeah, no, the answer is I feel worse for my mom because I know what comes after this for her. So the answer is always her. Ben's going to be fine. He's a tough guy. He's been working in doctor school right now, so he's going to be used to some of this. I think he did one of the rotations around childbirth and everything there. So he's at least got some preparation. I feel like because of that, he's walking into the party with at least an understanding. Now, it's the Mike Tyson line. Everybody's got to plan until they get punched in the mouth. And, Dad, that might be what Ben and the Buffalo Bills have in common right now after last night is we all thought, oh, what a perfect get-right game for the Buffalo Bills. We've got them Denver Broncos rolling into town. And yeah, the Broncos might have beaten the Chiefs. And yeah, the Broncos might be rolling in here feeling a little bit better than they did after they got boat raced by 70 points getting hung on them. But Dad, looking at that game last night, the Denver Broncos somehow win in the most excruciating fashion, 24-22. I have to ask you this question. You're a former longtime NFL defensive player. Last night in that game, who would you have rather been? The Broncos defense or the Bills defense? Because watching this game, I felt equally bad for both. As on one side, the Buffalo Bills could not stop turning the ball over. I don't know if buttered popcorn was on the pregame menu or not, but between 3 balls on the ground, 2 fumbles lost, 2 interceptions in this game, they couldn't stop giving it away. And on the other side, the Denver Broncos, I believe in the first 3 quarters, started with the ball 4 times in plus territory and managed to put up like 6 points. points. I don't know who would be more frustrating. So, Dad, to you as a defender, if you're sitting there on the sideline, who was more frustrated? The Bills defense watching their offense constantly give the ball away, or the Broncos defense constantly watching their offense completely unable to do anything with the gifts that they're giving them?
Wow, that's a great question. Probably seeing the offense turn the ball over would do it, because they always say, obviously, turnovers kill you, and rarely do you win. But we're sitting here in this game with Buffalo was -3 in the turnover category and basically should have won that game. But if you're asking me specifically, I would say the turnovers would be the worst. But we're watching this game, and it's one of those where everybody felt Buffalo was the better team coming in, and there's certainly questions about where they are. And yet they're down 9-0, and they're not playing well. And then they start to make a comeback, and then they take a lead, and everybody's like, okay, through all the muck and mire that's gone on, especially the turnovers, they're probably going to win this game, and it'll be a sigh of relief. And you say, okay, it's not like college. Nobody's getting ranked or rated. We'll work on the mistakes, but we got by with a win. But they screw that up as well, as we'll talk about with the interference call, and then 12 men on the field on a game-winning field goal that was missed. That was actually missed. You would have won the game if you had 11, but you had 12. Will Lutz gets another shot, and that is the ball game for Buffalo. They lose. So one, I think even the fans thought it was ugly. It was horrible. Josh Allen leads the league in interceptions. It hasn't been good, and there's a lot of storylines there. But I still thought they were going to pull that one out, and then just how was it they ripped defeat or victory from the jaws of defeat or whatever, or I don't know.
They snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
Victory.
You're right. What we saw in that scenario is going to be somebody's Joker villain turn. Like, somebody in Buffalo is just going to have to snap because of what they saw there at the end of that game. And, Dad, you can take people into this from the defensive side, because offensively what we saw twice in that game from the Denver Broncos was what we used to call the NASCAR field goal unit, where at the end of the first half you saw it. Denver didn't have any timeouts left. They knew they were driving to try and get in field goal range, and so with like 17 seconds left, they finished their last offensive play and then just had to have their field goal unit ready on the sideline to run in. You see offensive linemen rubbing their belly, which is how they report eligible to the field to the referee, which is like the funniest thing that we can do in sports, is have a bunch of fat guys have to rub their bellies in order to declare themselves eligible. And then they go out there and they execute that on the fly without being able to go up and really set up for it. They did that again at the end of this game. Denver was kneeling out the ball. They didn't have any timeouts left. Buffalo called 2 timeouts to stop the clock. So Buffalo had 2 stoppages of play to go over to the sideline and have the conversation, which Sean McDermott, their head coach, talked about after the game and said, we practice subbing on our field goal unit from the exact personnel group that we had on the field there. You had 2 timeouts to talk it over, and then you go out on the field and you biff that up with 12 there. Dad, I think we can definitively say having 10 on the field, greater than having 12 on the field, because at least you get a chance to play it. So Notre Dame vindicated.
This is, and you're right, Mike. I've been on both sides, and I'd been one of those guys rubbing my belly. I was the end on the field goal units, both in everywhere I played. I was on the field goal unit in Houston, in Philadelphia, and in Miami. So I would be one of those guys. And yes, you work on it all the time, sprinting on X amount of seconds, try and get set up, run the field goal. And for the defense, it's usually not as bad, because normally just about everybody is staying on the field for that. I mean, if you're a nickel, you're in dime, you might change a few people. Literally, though, you could run it out of the 11 that are on the field if you wanted to. If you didn't want to have to worry about getting anybody in. But there are times, sometimes you have an offensive lineman who's 6'7", or you have a reserve D lineman who's 6'7", who doesn't play a lot, and you want to get them in the game, or just certain personnel who would do better, or at least have a chance to block the field goal. So that's a reason you're changing some, but you're changing somewhat less on the defensive side, even though on the offensive side it's mainly the O-line. But you work on it all the time. You're right. So Buffalo is out there looking like they're set to go on what would be the potential game winner for Denver. And no, I don't think nobody even thought about 12 men on the field, right? You see everybody lined up. You see one guy deep. Kick the field goal, ball right. Buffalo Bills go nuts. Fans go nuts. We win the game. You see a flag on the field, and you're like, okay, what could... A lot of times when you see that flag, my thought is the defense lined up off sides because it's going to be a game-winning kick. You're trying to get a block, so you line up off sides. So as soon as I saw the flag, I thought, Denver's going to get another shot because this is normally off sides. And because if somebody moved on offense, they would have blown the play dead and wouldn't even have let the kick happen. So then it's 12 men, and you're thinking, okay, I could live with the offside of somebody trying to get a jump on the ball. It would still hurt. But to have 12 guys and just literally nobody seemed to be losing their minds on the sideline or on the field that there were 12 guys on the field. And when they made that call, we were all like, what the hell, seriously? And then, of course, on TV, you get the number thing out, 1, 2, 3, and you're 12. And like, oh, my God, they had 12 guys. So Lutz gets another chance, 5 yards closer, nails it right down the middle, and it's ball game. But to your point, and listen, this isn't rocket science. You work on this all the time, both from the offensive side and the defensive side, in situations of running on the field, sprinting on the field, knowing where you're supposed to be. I don't know who the extra person was in that case who was on the field. Obviously they do, but what a horrible, horrible way to lose since that kid missed the field goal, and that would have been the ball game.
Yeah, nightmare scenario there. And you could see it all over the face of Josh Allen, who was at the heart of a lot of the discussion that we're going to have next. This was Josh Allen after the game talking about what he saw from the Bills' effort last night.
Sucks. Shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. A lot of bad football. A lot of bad football. Yeah, I'm still confident, but it's no secret the clock's ticking, Got to have some urgency now.
What leaves you still confident in the offense after it's been so many weeks of kind of the same story here?
Because we've done it before.
Dad, he mentioned that sense of urgency. Right now, they're staring up at the Miami Dolphins in the division. Obviously, they've got the head-to-head win so far this season when those two teams squared off. But it's been a downward spiral for this team for a while. We talked about the other day, them and the Bengals currently both sitting outside of the AFC playoff scenarios. So how concerned should the Buffalo Bills be at this point, Dad? Is any of this salvageable, or is this a broken team?
Oh, very concerned. I mean, there were now the chance about Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, about his job. It's 6 games in a row. They haven't scored at least 26 points. They haven't had a streak like that since, I think, Josh Allen's rookie year. So they're not putting enough points on the board. And if you look at the AFC, after the division winners, you have 2 3-loss teams in Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and then 4-loss teams in the Texans, 4-loss team, and then 5-loss teams. So technically they're there, right? But Denver has put themselves there as well. They're 4-5 because that's what you have to start looking at. And we keep talking about the AFC North. We have a good possibility, though they could beat each other up, of them getting 2 teams in the wild card. So that would only leave one more spot. And like I said, right now you have 1 4-loss team and then a bunch of 5-loss teams. So are they in it? Yes, but not the way they're playing. And we talked about this yesterday when we were breaking down this game, is the inconsistencies of Buffalo right now. And what are you trusting? And the turnovers. I mean, again, Josh Allen right there in the lead in turnovers, and then you lost a couple of fumbles. You're not supposed to win a game where you're -3 in the turnover rate, but they were right there. Outside of 12 men on the field, they would have pulled that game off in an area where normally you don't. And even before that, we talk about the interference call. So it's Josh Allen who scores with a little under 2 minutes to go, I believe, on a 6-yard run, puts them up by 1. So here's Russell Wilson leading another game-winning drive, of which I think he has the record now of game-winning drives of what he's done. And he throws a deep ball. It's 0 coverage, again, meaning there's no safety back there. So you DBs, you're flat out one-on-one. They're sending the pressure on Wilson. And somehow Jerry Jeudy gets beyond Teron Johnson, and that's the only thing he can beat you. Don't let the man get past you. And Jeudy was past him in a heartbeat. And the ball was actually underthrown. If the ball was thrown correctly, it was 6. But the ball was underthrown, so Judy's got to stop for it, and Johnson ran into him. You had to make that call. There's no way you can say, let the players play at the end. That was interference, and it turned out to be a 28-yard penalty because it's a spot foul, and then that set up the scenario we've been talking about.
Dad, let me ask you this, though, because I think a lot of the conversation now is going to start to turn into Sean McDermott hot seat conversation, where looking at him and saying, all right, this is a guy, great defensive coordinator, but from a game management standpoint, from all the other things that we've talked about here, and the field goal stuff falls into that, everything else falls into game management in some way, shape, or form. And for Buffalo fans, I think that's been a point of frustration for a while. But even as the D coordinator, how do you feel about the all-out blitz in that spot? You went all out the play before. I get it, because you're trying to drive them back out of. But now you sacked them and knocked them way back here. You've got this pivotal down and just send the house at them there to put them in that one-on-one matchup. How do you feel about that call in that moment?
Not a fan. Not a fan of that call. Listen, I like aggressive play. I mean, the most fun I had in football was playing for Buddy Ryan and then Bud Carson in Philadelphia. You want to talk about aggressive play. But to me, there's aggressive and aggressive smart play. And when a team has to go that length of the field to get to field goal range, I'd like to have somebody back there, someone, in case something like that happens where, because a blitz doesn't get there every time, and give, Denver credit enough to hold off or the fact that even if a blitz is going to get there, you can hoist the ball up because you have one-on-one, right? It's going to be one-on-one. So before you even get hit, you got go routes going there. You're just going to hoist the ball. And you can catch a snap and you can hoist it before a free rusher can get there, depending on where they're coming from. And then you're relying on A, a 50-50 ball, B, your guy obviously being able to go get it and their guy not, or interference, which is exactly what they got here. So I'm not a fan of it, Mike. I like having someone back, some safety back deep in the field or deeper in the field for situations just like that. And I know you may not get as quick a pressure, but you're hoping to get some pressure to get the ball out quick, and then you have a guy kind of back there playing center field. So I am not a fan of that. We've seen that time and time again burn a team. It certainly worked. I mean, like, coordinators would never do it if we show stats and it works 5% of the time. They're not going to do it, but they feel we'd rather have. But I also think
you have a guy that's super aggressive like that just gets in that mode. We saw it happen. Yep. I mean, Greg Williams lost his job with the Jets for going all-out blitz in a similar situation at the end of a game. So I want to say briefly for the Broncos, impressive 3-game stretch here, right? What they've managed to do, pulling their season out of a tailspin, is incredible. I don't think they're going to make the postseason because at the end of the day, you still saw an offense that was wholly incapable of going out there and putting up points against a beat-up Buffalo defense. That Buffalo defense has nothing to hang their hats about after the way that they played last night. Denver, I think, still going to end up on the outside looking into the postseason just because I don't think they're that team, but they've been resilient, and offensively, you've seen some of the Russ moments pop back up. It's been about a baseline bunch of stuff for him, but last night that touchdown to Cortland Sutton was the most improbable completion of the next-gen stats era. They put that out during the game, and we saw it and we thought that, but then they bore it out statistically. They're not going to be a playoff team, Dad, but they at least, I think, are going to leave this season feeling a little bit more hopeful about the potential future there.
That is 1,000% correct. And quick second, if you haven't seen the Cortland Sutton touchdown, make sure you see it, because when I saw the play, I'm like, oh, wow, he just had to lay it up there because of the pressure. No way that was caught in bounds until you see the replay. Cortland Sutton, what an incredible job he did there. But you said it, because we start talking about, as the season goes on, we'll talk about quarterbacks and teams, and we know they paid him a lot of money, but is he going to stay there and be that guy? We know Sean Payton is going to be. But they may be building now. We'll have to see. Really quickly on Buffalo, we talk about Sean McDermott and his timeline there. I think it's going to be Ken Dorsey. And I never like to see anybody get fired, but I think Ken Dorsey's going to be in some trouble. And for Denver, Mike, the game I'm doing this week we thought was going to get flexed. It's Minnesota at Denver. Look at the storylines. Denver winning 3 in a row, and Minnesota and Josh Dobbs, what he's doing. Now all of a sudden, man, this game Sunday night I'm going to call looks like a really fun one.
Yeah, finally a little bit of juice there. So something to look forward to in the primetime slate this week, which is not the case for us this week. But I am with you, Dad. As the Buffalo Bills do the scouting report coming off this, I think Ken Dorsey is going to ultimately be the odd man out in this situation. All right, welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. Excited to welcome in SEC Network host Peter Burns, as we had plenty of news in college football this weekend. But Peter, first and foremost, you just flashed the Buc-ee's Cup for us coming on to camera. I made my first trip to Buc-ee's this weekend. You've got the merchandise here. For people that are on different sides of this, because I've been amazed at the amount of people, when I heard I was going to Buc-ee's for the first time, Peter, were so supportive, were excited for me. And then I've heard chirps from the other crowd that think Buc-ee's is overrated here. So I'd imagine I know where you fall, but give the uninitiated a little taste of what Buc-ee's is all about.
Well, like if there was heaven and it was full of unicorns and delicious treats, it would basically be right below where Buc-ee's is at. Like, let's just put it this way. Mike, you've gotten a picture, right, with Buc-ee himself. I mean, this is celebrity status. Like, this is not just a regular gas station. This is like nirvana with everything you ever needed in your life.
It
really is incredible. Beef jerky bar, clean bathrooms, incredible snacks, brisket sandwiches, and I brought Christmas presents for my nieces and nephew there. They're going to have Buc-ee's onesies coming out of this because it's the most well-branded gas station in the country.
I got car insurance. I mean, it was everything we ever needed.
For those that say it's overrated, that's kind of like the In-N-Out burger talk. I love In-N-Out. I don't think it's overrated, and people think that Buc-ee's is overrated are completely wrong. It is a phenomenal. I mean, it just blows your mind when you see it and how big it is and what you can get inside. So everybody, if you see one, stop by and go inside and take pictures. Peter, as far as what's going on before we get on the field, Jimbo Fisher is fired. He gets $76 million to not coach Texas A&M. Why during the season did they do this? And do you think maybe somebody in mind, or who a couple of people in mind might be to take that job?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been getting it a lot. And I think the deal is Jeremy Foley, the old Florida athletic director, once had a famous quote, says, what needs to be done eventually should just be done now. And I think that they were worried about him getting momentum of beating Mississippi State, winning another game. And remember a couple of years ago, LSU was on the fence with Les Miles. And then all of a sudden, they're like him and Hahn, and he ends up winning against A&M. They carry him off the field. Only for a couple of games later, they end up firing Les. So, I mean, like, they learned a lesson from the SEC. Like, we sure as hell is never going to do that again. So it was boosters just cutting a big check. But again, now they're on the hook from the athletic department for $7.5 million to not coach. Like, that's amazing to me. And I don't think that they have a name right now. You know, I don't think this is they're probably going to be the crown jewel unless Mac Brown decides to call it a career. North Carolina, as far as the marquee job that's going to be open. So I don't believe that they're going to have to rush to be first to market. They're going to take their time, and every single agent is going to use it as an extension and leverage bait coming up soon. It's Jimmy Sexton's like Christmas gift to the world. That oil money is about to determine a new hire.
I have to imagine the only person, I don't know if he represents him or not, but Dan Lanning's agent has to be furious because he's the only one that came out and categorically denied it yesterday. Now, I'll say he's in the middle of a playoff run in this team. I'm sure the last thing you want to do when you believe you've got a shot to win a national title is go out and introduce that kind of chaos by not emphatically denying it, Peter.
And he just got a contract extension. Remember, it's like, I don't even know if he signed it, right? Like, because sometimes he take like a month or two. Like, he literally got a contract extension. He might get a contract extension before the contract extension ink actually dries. So that's the chaos of all of this right now for A&M.
Who would be the ideal candidate for them? When you're looking out in the names that have been put out there, who would be the hire that A&M fans would see as the home run?
I mean, Mike Elko is one of those names that's out there. He was a defensive coordinator, has done a great job at Duke. There's going to be some names thrown out like Lane Kiffin. That's not happening. Dion, that's not happening right now. So everybody's going to put their name in the mix. There's two different names that I think are kind of interesting to me. One comes way out of left field, and it's Dabo Swinney. Right. Think about what's happening at Clemson. It hasn't been the best of times. He's told everybody to get the hell off the bandwagon. If Tyler and Spartanburg is starting to kind of get into your craw a little bit, might be time to go a different direction. But I just don't think – I think Jimbo was trying to get away from FSU when he took the A&M job. I don't think you get a coach that was trying to get away from Clemson to take that job. The guy that I love and I think would be fantastic, and I saved this and I got the helmet right there. I'm a former UTSA golfer. There's a guy named Jeff Traylor that coaches the Roadrunners who's unbelievable. And I'm telling you, once you get an opportunity to see who this guy is, he is as uniquely Texan as anybody, right? Like, he's out of Friday Night Lights, and the job that he's done with no recruiting budget and really no bones around UTSA's program to build them into a great, honestly, a great squad, that's where I would go, and he would be the next home run hire in my mind.
Wow, that would be an interesting move. You mentioned that Texas A&M could be the cherry job, or maybe North Carolina if Mac Brown leaves. What about Michigan? And I don't mean Jim Harbaugh being fired. I mean Jim Harbaugh basically saying, I've had enough of what's going on. I got NFL teams chasing me every year. I'm ditching to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, between the NCAA and with the way the Big Ten has handled this, and I mean, like, even the Michigan president, I mean, like, it may be – whenever he came out saying, basically, hey, our thoughts and prayers are with Harbaugh, I was like, who has brought this upon themselves, right? Like, come on, let's be honest. And I think Michigan would be an interesting job. However, if Harbaugh goes, which I do think it's interesting the way that this thing has all been handled, I would have been fully on board saying at the beginning of the season he was leaving. And then now this is almost like you know what? I'm pissed off. Like, I want to go out there and I want to showcase something. You see that from the players, and I think that he feeds off this like weird vibe energy. Like, Harbaugh's a vibes guy, total vibes guy, and I think he would just be like, you know what, screw it. Let's just see how many I can win and how many times I can beat the Buckeyes in a row.
I mean, he did crown them America's team yesterday. So now that you've got that moniker, how can you run away to anything else once you've become America's team? Peter, last one for me here.
I want him in college football. I need Jim Harbaugh in college football. Like, college football is about characters, right? And it's whether it's Lane Kiffin being weird or Lincoln Riley not letting guys available for press conferences. Like if I want kind of like, everybody is 500 level. We have a salary cap, all this stuff, and I get okay sound bites. I'll watch football on Sundays, okay? But if I want just chaos, I want people peeing and dog celebrations in the Egg Bowl and weird stuff in the Iron Bowl and olden buckets. Like, I want weird people. Jim Harbaugh is my weird person I need in college football.
I mean, Arkansas just had to come out and actually put out a statement explaining and apologizing for their players watching a Christmas movie at halftime.
Polar
it's
Express.
The dumbest, most beautiful sport possible. It's perfect.
Polar Express. God bless it. God bless it.
God bless it. Peter, is Jaden Daniels going to win the Heisman now after this weekend? Is it over and done?
What's difficult for him is that he's going to be playing at noon in 2 weeks against Texas A&M, right as the time that Michigan's and Ohio State kick off. So I think he gets a little bit lost in that mix. And they've got to win that game, because if he has 4 losses, they're just not going to give it to him. But I saw what he did in Baton Rouge a couple nights ago, and it was nothing short of fantastic. I mean, it was record breaking. They couldn't stop it. The problem is he's not going to play in championship weekend. I think Bo Nix will. And if that's the case, I look at Bo Nix or Marvin Harrison Jr., even Michael Penix, that they're going to have that last laugh. Unless he puts up just stupid monster numbers, I don't know if he's going to win it. I love it, but I don't think he'll actually win it.
It is incredible. One of the more unique and incredible individual performances I have ever seen. Peter, we could do this all day with you, man. We appreciate the time. We appreciate spreading the Bucky's love. Thanks so much, brother. Have a great rest of the season. Hopefully we'll talk to you soon, Peter.
And Pops didn't even yell at me today. Like, this is the first time we've had a conversation where, like, I'm never asking that a-hole ever on again.
Yeah, Mike asked me to be nice, so I played nice today. Next time you're on, I'm coming at you both barrels.
Let's go. I'm ready. I'll get my Bucky's fired up and we'll go. Thanks, boys.
I know.
Thanks,
my one regret I have from my trip is that I went to Bucky's and the first thing I walked in and saw was the giant inflatable Bucky's beaver lawn ornament for Christmas, and I didn't pull the trigger on it. So anybody in the state of Texas that knows me, if you got some time and you pass a Bucky's, add it to the holiday list for your boy, because I think it would look great in Manhattan Beach. So we talked about it a little bit with Peter Burns, who we appreciate giving us some time, but we got to dive into some of this Jim Harbaugh sound from yesterday because we finally heard from the man himself. Coming off a weekend where Michigan gets a win against Penn State without Jim Harbaugh on the sideline because Tony Petitti and the Big Ten announced that they were going to suspend him for 3 games basically the day before. And so we see Sharon Moore, we see the crying, we see everything that happened there, Dad. But now we get to hear from the guy himself. And it has been an absolute gem, which included this that we referenced. Jim Harbaugh talking about his plans to appear at the court hearing where a judge will hear arguments about whether or not to grant Michigan a temporary restraining order to nullify the suspension. They want Jim Harbaugh back on the field in all actuality for the Ohio State game, if nothing else. And it led us, God bless the broken road that led us here to this, Jim Harbaugh officially crowning the Michigan Wolverines as America's team. Take a listen.
Yeah, watching, I would have to say, I mean, everybody, it's got to be America's team. It's got to be America's team. America loves a team that beats the odds, beats the adversity, overcomes what the naysayers and critics, so-called experts think. That's my favorite kind of team.
Dad, the thing is I actually believe that he believes that about this team. I 100% believe, because the football brain that happens inside most locker rooms for teams where you're so convinced inside your little bubble that everyone in the outside world is out to get you, that they're all wrong and that you're all right. But I think Jim even goes a step beyond that just because of what a big meathead, incredible football guy he is.
Mike, I also think that there are people who believe that from the standpoint of the players. What is the one thing that's been constant through all of this is the players are the ones that get screwed. The adults make the mistakes, and the players have to pay for it. And in this case, not having their head coach on the sideline, or if the postseason got taken away. So I do think there's a group or a section of the country that's like, you know what? I'm going to root for those players. Not so much Harbaugh saying it's America's team, but these players, man, who have not had their head coach.
You think so?
Oh, I think so, because I think those that worry about the players, the kids, as we call them in college football, that because, Jim Harbaugh gave a recruit a cheeseburger, he's not on the field for the first 3 games. Because of Connor Stallions and the coaching staff, Jim Harbaugh's not on the field now. It had nothing to do with the players. So you know what? Man, I'm going to root for the players. The players have come out and said, go ahead and treat us as the villains if you want. We're out here just doing our thing. There's part of me, Mike, and I know you don't like Michigan. For me, it was USC at Notre Dame. For you, it was Michigan. But there is part of me that says, you know what? These players have done nothing wrong at all, and they're getting all the grenades thrown around them. There's part of me that says, man, I'd love to see them kind of pull it off.
Oh, Dad, I think you are in the overwhelming minority. I think most of America is so sick of this team. I'm not saying I am, because I'm with you. I have empathy for the players in the situation and what they've been through, because they have been at fault in none of this. But I think you're extending a lot of that to a group in college football that is not equipped to handle that, not equipped to think like that. I think they look at this as, in college football, we've always talked about it, the coaches are the figureheads for these teams. The players move so much, especially now in the transfer portal era. But even when it was, hey, you got to be there for at least 3 years to even just go pro, and transferring's a lot harder, coaches have been the figureheads. And so I think a lot of public sentiment comes off that. And hearing Jim Harbaugh go up there and say that they are America's team, saying that he wanted to go and argue in court like Tom Cruise from A Few Good Men, saying that he's, everything that we've heard from him, everything we've seen from them publicly has been defiant and has been treating them like they are the victim, even from the coaching sound there. And most people look at the situation and go, you made the problems that you are dealing with now. And so I disagree. I don't think there is going to be a lot of empathy at all for this team outside of Ann Arbor and outside of the state of Michigan.
Well, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, because there are normally games where I'm like, hey, can somebody give Michigan, when somebody's one of the top teams, you want to see if somebody can knock them off. There's part of me that's like, man, I hope for these players, and I say it, and I always preface it by saying, I hope for the players' sake, man, that they just make a run, because I'm separating coaches from players. And I get what you're saying. A lot of people can't. They're going to put them all together. And like Peter Burns said, and I agree, Harbaugh is the gift that just keeps on giving. Said while he's feeling sick, he's not going to get sick. A virus, he's the iron wall that a virus smashes itself on. He'll just do push-ups and eat an apple. I mean, He's gold. He's gold. But from the player standpoint, and we were both players, and we always think player first, that's where my mind goes, Mike. And I don't think I'm alone. I may not be in the majority, but I do think there are going to be some people that are rooting for the players themselves on the field. But you're right, overall, it is the adults that have caused this, and it's always the kids, again, I do that in air quotations, that have to pay the price.
I think your people. I understand your sentiment there. I just don't think college football fans have that level of discrepancy on this particular issue. What I will say is I'm interested in the conversation that keeps coming up, because going into that Penn State game with them, I don't know how much sign stealing goes into, we put 2 extra offensive linemen on the field and punched you in the face. The interesting question for me is going to be the Ohio State game. And what I think is going to happen in this situation, I think Michigan's going to receive this temporary restraining order. I think Jim Harbaugh is going to be back on the field to end the season. I think we're going to get to the postseason, and Big Ten, like you always say, is going to punch his pilot this. Tony Petitti is going to wash his hands of the situation, and they're going to be able to say, hey, we did all we could. We got you to the postseason. Now this is the NCAA's problem after the season, because the CFP, we know, not governed by the NCAA. We know the NCAA is not going to work that fast. And so this is what we talked about. Peter Burns is actually the guy I saw lay out the scenario where now the Big Ten gets to look up and say, well, we tried. And then the legal process did what it did. Jim Harbaugh's back on the sideline. And quite honestly, Dad, that's the way I want it. I don't want any excuses going into the game this year, because I think that matchup has become fascinating. What we saw against Penn State was a team that in critical moments decided to go back to the old way. Michigan has spent the majority of this season being a middle-of-the-pack rushing team and letting J.J. McCarthy air it out a little bit more. Going up against Penn State, that changed. Now, you can say part of that is because Penn State couldn't push the ball downfield at all. We saw them make a change at offensive coordinator because of that. But now I am fascinated against a more balanced team. And by balanced, I mean Ohio State has Marvin Harrison Jr. On offense, and will instantly be the best offensive player far and away between either of these two teams. What does Michigan do in critical moments if Ohio State is able to actually muster offense in a way that Penn State wasn't? That's my one concern coming off of this game. We've seen J.J. McCarthy in the game last year throw them to victory in that one. Can he do it again in this game? That will be the biggest question there, the biggest thing I have concerns about. But Michigan will rightly be favored in that game.
Yeah, as they should be. They have Maryland first. They'll take care of business there. And then I just think they'll control the ball, Mike. I mean, as we talked about, they ended that Penn State game with 32 straight runs. Marvin Harrison Jr. is the great equalizer. He gives you a chance. We keep talking about great defense always gives you a chance. Marvin Harrison always gives you a chance when you have him. He is absolutely amazing for that team. But I just don't see it for 4 quarters. I just see Michigan being too good. I see Michigan playing that old-time football and just playing smash mouth. I know McCarthy threw the ball last year, but I just think with Corum and that O-line and that D-line, I just think they're going to be too much and win the Big Ten. And then we'll lay the cards out in the playoffs and see what happens there.
And by the way, I say they'll be favored because they'll be at home in this game. And while Ohio State's been the number 1 team in the initial college football playoff rankings, and we got round 2 of those rankings coming up tonight, where I don't think much is going to change based on the results we saw this weekend. Oregon wins a closer one than people expected against USC. Washington wins a closer, I wouldn't say closer than expected, a close one against Utah at home. Ohio State hangs on. Michigan does their thing in that big game, and will certainly get the boost because of it. I could see, Dad, Georgia coming off now 2 straight ranked wins, including a boat racing of Ole Miss this past weekend. I could see them leapfrogging Ohio State for that number 1 spot just on the strength of that, because I'd imagine that was probably pretty close to begin with.
And you know what? They could do that, and it doesn't matter, because if Ohio State beat Michigan, Ohio State would be back at number 1. So it's all going to play out, just like the Heisman. You're a Heisman voter. I think it's going to come down to that Pac-12 title game of Penix Jr. against Bo Nix. That could be it for the Heisman. That'll be exciting.
Yeah, you've got Marvin Harrison Jr. creeping up there in the odds as well. And as we talked about, Jaden Daniels coming off of a 600-yard individual offensive performance. Probably going to have something to say about that. GoJo and Golic here on the DraftKings Network. Dad, we've talked a lot about the AFC playoff picture this morning because the Buffalo Bills are on the outside of it looking in, and I don't know about you, I've totally lost confidence in that team despite the fact that they've got a quarterback with so much talent that's so high variance because of the turnover proclivity since he came into the league, the most turnovers of any player in the NFL. But he's so otherworldly potent on the other side. I always worry about them backdooring their way in, but I can't trust this team. Like, it's been Super Bowl or bust for the Buffalo Bills this season, and I can't trust them in that conversation anymore and won't. I won't do that to myself now. So I feel like we can confidently put them to the side on that. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. Now, it's like we've done this each week about a top three in the AFC. I know we're going to go to the NFC, but we know the Chiefs are there. And Cincinnati takes a step back. Buffalo takes a step back. So is it just Kansas City and Baltimore, who, oh, by the way, they lost to Cleveland. And Cleveland and Baltimore split this year. So now it's like we said we have the deepest conference by strength. Now we have a number one in Kansas City, and we have some flip-flopping after that on where we're going to go.
It just looks like an even easier road for the Chiefs to the Super Bowl again.
Like,
unless Baltimore can really, fine-tune all of this, it's what we've seen in the past is so lodged in my brain where we know the Chiefs have managed to work their way through problems before and find their way on top because they've got 15 and no one else does.
I'll tell you what, the biggest, I don't want to say bummer, but maybe miscalculation. You know who would be there if their quarterback played the way they paid him to play and thought he was going to play? It would be Cleveland. If Deshaun Watson would have gotten back to that, in the area of top 5 quarterback play that he had in Houston, this would be the next team, right? Because their defense is phenomenal. They, along with Baltimore, and if they had that on the offensive side, but you have a Deshaun Watson who hasn't played as well as you thought and been nicked up, got another MRI on his ankle. So that's kind of been what the expectation was, and what reality is something that's holding them back.
I think if you could have gotten Deshaun healthy and playing like a top 15 quarterback, you'd have this team primed for a deep playoff run. That's how good the defense has been. But, Dad, all this underscores that the NFC might slowly be morphing into a more interesting playoff picture as we have it situated right now. When you look at the current NFC playoff picture, if they started today, and who would be involved in all of this, coming off this past weekend, we know we've talked about the Philadelphia Eagles as the number one team in our power rankings here on the show. We'll do that again on Thursday. But the 49ers, Dad, after this weekend, back atop of the NFC West, where they've been kind of tied with the Seattle Seahawks. We talked about that last week. But, Dad, when you look at the result from the 49ers this past weekend, they get Trent Williams back, they get Deebo Samuel back. Is it as simple as seeing that and saying, okay, they're fine now after they go out and boat race the Jags?
Well, I mean, they hit a few hiccups during the regular season. It's what teams do. That's why we've only had one undefeated team since 1972. And while we had some close teams there, usually you don't play a perfect regular season, though the Patriots did it before losing in the Super Bowl. I get it. But they stumbled here a few weeks in a row. I don't know if it's easy as saying that, but Deebo Samuel is back, 4 catches, 30 yards. Not a monster game, but him being back adds to the arsenal of where you go for Brock Purdy, who threw 3 touchdowns and no interceptions. Trent Williams, you always have to remember to say he's back because what a solid left tackle that he is. But it's the 3 there, right, that we're talking about? Is it not? It's San Francisco, it's Philadelphia, and Dallas. We keep talking about their defense. Their offense has been money the last few games. They're playing Carolina this week, so I know it's the NFL and anything can happen, but I mean, come on. This is one you can't give away. While San Francisco plays Tampa Bay, and then it's Philly and KC. It's the Super Bowl rematch on Monday night. So, I mean, Philly obviously has the toughest game of those 3. But I think it's those 3. And then do you put Detroit in with those 3, or are they just on the outside looking in? Are they knocking on that door? Are they through that door? Because that's going to be the 4 we talk about. But is it the 3 and then we go to the next level?
I would have Detroit firmly in there just because if I'm looking like, yes, the trajectory since they played for Dallas and San Francisco has been very different, right? San Francisco just pulled themselves out of a skid. But I think you look there, Dad, we assumed a team with that many all-pros on it wouldn't suffer from what we just saw happen, which was a lack of depth that shone through when a couple of their pivotal weapons were off there, and I include Trent Williams in the weapons conversation. All of a sudden, it started to look a little bit different because, I don't know about you, Brock Purdy was not a different quarterback this last game than we saw before. We just saw a defense that clearly benefited from bringing Chase Young over and was able to go and get a bunch of pressure, drop guys back, and I think match coverage with pass rush perfectly in a way that bothered Trevor Lawrence, and a Jags offense that, quite frankly, Dad, once you get out of the opening play script, has been underwhelming for a majority of the season. The Jags are a really confusing team, and I think that's why overall negotiating the NFC landscape is difficult, because the Cowboys have beat up on bad teams and then gotten losses when they've played the upper crust in San Francisco and the Philadelphia Eagles in this conference. And so I don't know how much differently I'm supposed to think about them, even though they seem to have finally figured out, hey, CeeDee Lamb's our number one receiver. Let's throw him the ball a ton and good things are going to happen here.
Let me ask you, if you had to rank them right now, just the two, and I think I might lean Detroit, would you put Detroit ahead in a power ranking? Detroit ahead of the Cowboys? And listen, they have a better record. They only have the 2 losses, and Dallas has 3. I would think if you're ranking the NFC, I think you'd almost put Detroit 3rd, right? Put Philly or San Fran 1 and 2, however you want to do it, and then Detroit, and then Dallas. Though some people may give Dallas the go now because they've won 3 in a row, and the offense has come alive, albeit not against great teams, but so we'll see going forward. And again, Carolina this week, so it's not like they can prove a lot outside of just getting the W here. But I think it's tough for people to put Detroit in there because Detroit hasn't been there. And what Dan Campbell is doing there has been nothing short of spectacular. And now we're seeing in the AFC side in year 1 of DeMeco Ryan and what's happening in Houston. Because, by the way, Houston is only just the 1 game behind Jacksonville right now, and already Houston smoked Jacksonville the first time they played by 20 points. I think 37-17, I think the score was. So, I mean, kudos to what's going on there. But, yeah, I think Detroit, I'd almost put him would you put him in the top 3 ahead of the Cowboys?
I think at this point, based on what they've done, now listen, Detroit had a game where they gave up a ton of points against the Chargers. They got dropped by the Ravens in one of their first games against really upscale competition since the Chiefs and the Seahawks to start the season. Like, Dad, their schedule has not been a murderer's row, and that's putting it lightly. And then they played the Baltimore Ravens, and they got dropped pretty hard. So you're right in that they're overcoming a bunch of inertia, but for the Cowboys, that been there thing only counts so much. I get you've won a playoff game, but based on the talent of this roster, that's what I feel like we're stuck on is, hey, we know what this weapon of a defense is supposed to be. We know what the offensive line and receiver group is supposed to be. But in the big games where it's supposed to be the measuring stick, it's fallen short. And then everybody else, they've gone out there and they've blown their doors off, and it's looked really impressive. And, man, let us overall take this message from the Buffalo Bills, or excuse me, not the Buffalo Bills. Let us overall take this message from the Miami Dolphins and the Denver Broncos that maybe blowouts aren't the way to judge and determine the quality of these teams overall.
And then for me, it's like after the 4 in the NFC, who legitimately do we think could take over in the NFC? I mean, Seattle, are we going there? The way Minnesota is now with Josh Dobbs, I'm not taking anybody in the NFC South to do that. So it almost seems like there's 4 and then a monster drop-off to who potentially could put together a run. I don't see it out of anybody else.
No, I would agree. I think right now it feels like you're asking about that dividing line between Detroit and maybe Dallas there. I do think it is firmly that 4 big space, everybody else who's going to come after that right now, and that's including the Saints who are currently leading that division, but Derek Carr injured there, and even before that offense not looking anywhere close to what people expected with him coming up over center there. I think you've got that top 4, and then I think after that it really is Seattle and Minnesota. That's the only 2 teams I'd be thinking about. One, because Geno Smith, we saw that season last year. We know the weapons they've got in that room, and then the wild card Josh Dobbs that you're going to get to see in primetime right now, who is slowly starting to work his way into the conversation about, is this longer than a 1-year rental in Minnesota for Josh Dobbs, depending how this goes. That becomes a really interesting conversation you guys can have.
I completely agree, 100%.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr. Lots coming up this hour. News out of New York and the Jets and what they will continue to not do, much to the dismay of everybody watching Jets football this season. But, Dad, did you raise your hand because you had something to say?
I did.
You raise your hand because you're still eating right now because you have my mom delivering you food during the body of every show at this point here?
Yep. Got a couple of pancakes on the way. Let me ask you this. When I went in the house just to grab something really quick, I grabbed chocolate-covered peanuts with over the chocolate is peppermint. Which do you like more? The Christmas peppermint-flavored things or the Halloween, November-ish pumpkin-flavored things?
I would say I always generally tend to skew mint, like mint chocolate chips, one of my favorite ice cream flavors, which I know is controversial for a lot of people somehow. But the holiday peppermint is a real nice change of pace. What about you?
It's a tough one because I love them both. I mean, I love a pumpkin pie. I love the pumpkin flavored coffee. I love pumpkin flavored things. It's a tough one, but I haven't had the peppermint yet this season. And I will say, we do have now some peppermint things in the house. We have our Christmas tree up, by the way. And for those that think it shouldn't happen right now, y'all can stick it. Don't care. Makes us happy. That's all that matters. There is something to the peppermint flavor. There is something to a little peppermint in the coffee or just having one of these with the peppermint flavor. So overall, I'd probably lean toward peppermint, but it's close. It's 1 and 1A.
You know what? I think I'm going to go with pumpkin, actually, just because it's a little more subtle. I like peppermint a lot, but it becomes the whole personality of whatever it's in.
True. That's true.
So that's my biggest worry there with like a milkshake or something like that. And I get it. For pumpkin spice lattes, there's a million things where pumpkin, between the branding and the flavor, can sometimes overwhelm. But I think it's capable of being a little bit more subtle than something like peppermint is overall. By the way, we can just throw in the old mint in the springtime, too, when you get like the Shamrock Shake back at McDonald's. Oh. That, I think, is the real sweet spot. When you get the mint chocolate that pops up in the springtime around those holidays, that might be the one that I would put above all else.
That's a great call. But as far as peppermint and pumpkin, you're right. And I guess like anything else, it comes down to personal taste. Peppermint overwhelms or can. Pumpkin is more subtle. So that is very true. So why not do what we should do? Both. Boom.
Man, peppermint pumpkin together would sound like a nightmarish combination, actually.
Yeah.
Or would it?
Yeah. I listen. We would try it. I would definitely
I'd try anything.
Yeah, I would like it in maybe a pie form and where I could throw some whipped cream over the top of it and really, really test it there.
Really just drink in all of the processed sugars in that. For best holiday flavor superlative is going to have to wait for another day. That might sound like a list that we have to do as we get closer and closer to the Christmas season here that we're in right now. But it is Tuesday on this show, which means it's time for Week 10 NFL superlatives that we've got coming out of the performances this last weekend. And, Dad, let's start with this. The grass is always greener. The person who looked the happiest with their new team, we've had Kevin Byard, friend of the program, who is out with the Philadelphia Eagles. That was a couple of weeks ago. They were on bye this past weekend. Josh Dobbs, Cardinals to Vikings, bearing immediate fruit. And Dad, this would probably be my pick just because we had the visuals. How freaking happy did Chase Young look on the sideline with his old running mate from Ohio State and Nick Bosa?
And I loved when they showed the pictures of them together at Ohio State. He looked happy. But, I'm going to go with Josh Dobbs, and I'll give you the reason. Chase Young came from Washington. They had a pretty good D-line, right? I mean, they had some number one picks there, and I liked their D-line. Kevin Byard came from Tennessee, where Vrabel always has a good defense, always has a good, tough defense. So it's not like – I think they went to better defenses, but not like, wow, huge difference defenses. The biggest thing I think for them is they went from teams that weren't going to be in the playoffs to teams that could make a run at the Super Bowl. For Josh Dobbs, and you've said this, he went from weapons in Arizona to like, oh, wait a minute. These are the toys I get in Minnesota? And again, they may not even make the playoffs, but still, we're talking about individuals for change of what he had to deal with in Arizona, what he has, and he still has Justin Jefferson to look forward to once he comes back. So I think from that way of looking at it, I'm going to go with Josh Dobbs on just the difference of personnel he had in Arizona to throw to and to work with on the offense to the difference he has in Minnesota.
It's a great call, and I think for both of them, especially for Dobbs and for Chase Young, going from the organizational quality that you had. What have we heard since going back to last year, Dad, when that NFLPA survey came out? What a tire fire it seems like in Arizona. We've seen articles about the Bidwell family and what other people are claiming has gone on there as far as workplace practices. And then for Chase Young, I mean, I understand it's new ownership now with the Washington Commanders, but he's lived life under the Dan Snyder regime there for a long time, and we've seen how the fish rots when the head is that particular shade of ugly. And so now to get out to San Francisco, that's been one of the places that has been this bastion of security where the organization is so stable, where John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan seem like these pillars to build around there, and you go into a D-line room that, you had talent on that defense, there's no doubt, Dad, but this D-line room in the 49ers has always felt, and maybe this is just because me wrongfully giving the outcomes to them in this, because you're right. The D-line for the Washington Commanders was chock full of guys that were first-round draft picks, just like this D-line is in San Francisco. But I think sometimes, Dad, a change of scenery can do wonders for a guy. And it just looked like a guy half a sack in this game. They got him out there in a bunch of pass rush situations, and you saw pushing the pocket, being able to collapse it. The back end helped them a lot, but I thought that 49ers defensive front already looked like they got a little bit of an added boost from having Chase Young around there too.
Listen, having played on a D-line in Philadelphia that had great players, like especially with the Bosa that you have in San Fran, we had multiple great players on that D-line in Philly. What still made a lot of it was the fact that you could rotate in and depth. And you know that as a former O-lineman, you got to stand there and play all 70, 75 plays, and you're watching 6, 7 D-linemen rotate in and fresh legs on you, how detrimental that can be, especially when it's talent even in the depth part of it. So that's what was huge for San Fran a few years ago, back when they had DeForest Buckner, and they still certainly have some of that depth now, but they had the most back then, and they're kind of recreating that now.
Yep, completely agree. So that kind of depth associated with what we've seen, and for him, I think the differentiator for me was 49ers got a real chance to win the Super Bowl this year. I think the Vikings have a chance to be a frisky playoff team, but I don't think they're a Super Bowl contender. Kevin Byard obviously in that class as well, but I just think for him a little bit below the standard that these other two have in terms of who'd be happiest with this move. Dad, let's go to the pack-it-in squad for the week. The bubble team that should probably just call it quits based on what we've seen. Few teams in this range that qualify. The Chargers, obviously, in a weird no man's land where we've been talking more about firing their coach than necessarily what's going on the field. The Titans at 3-6, the Packers at 3-6, the Commanders, Falcons, and Rams. Who of that group sticks out to you as the, hey, you know what, you'd probably be better off losing most of the rest of these games?
This one was easy for me. It's Washington, and I look at the divisions because of it. Okay, we just talked and really the conference as well. We talked about it early on in the AFC with Buffalo. Buffalo now has 5 losses. There's 3 wild cards right now. You have outside of the division winners 2 3-loss teams, Pittsburgh and Cleveland, 1 4-loss team, and then a bunch of 5-loss teams. So the 5-loss teams are still in it. Now, whether we think they're going to make it or not, it's a different story. To me, though, they still have a chance if they get hot. Saints and Falcons I throw out because that division was won by a losing record last year in Tampa Bay. So they both, even at 5-5 and 4-6, have a chance to win the division, which gets you in the playoffs. It's Washington. You're dealing right now in a division where Philly is 8-1, the Cowboys are 6-3, and you have 6 losses. You're done, as far as I'm concerned. You're not jumping back into the fray here, I don't think, even in the wild card. So for me, it's Washington.
Washington's interesting because do you think Sam Howell's the quarterback there next year? It's been so all over the place where the production, we know in terms of yardage, isn't he leading the NFL right now in terms of passing yards? But we also know there's been turnovers. We know he's been sacked a ton, and while some of that goes to the Washington offensive line, it's also a product of quarterback that's playing like this is still the ACC at times and trying to bumper car his way through things. Do you think he's the guy next year? Because that, to me, is kind of how I looked at the lens of this question, and the Falcons were the team that was most interesting to me because it's become very clear the quarterback of their future is not on the roster. Desmond Ridder got benched for Taylor Heineke, and then now that Taylor Heineke's banged up, you've seen Arthur Smith really non-committal on who's going to be under center, and I think that's indicative of they know they got to go out and get somebody else. They tried to bargain bin this thing, and it did not work in the middle of that offense. Arthur Smith's decisions in other places of that offense, see Bijan Robinson, have been under scrutiny in the last few weeks, and so he's going to start to feel the heat, and the easiest get-out-of-jail-free card for that is, hey, go and find a way to get a new quarterback in that building. I don't know where it's going to be based on where they're picking, but I know winning more games for the Falcons this year, even if it makes you a playoff team, which I know is the goal and I know the players want, does nothing for you long term because, again, that is not a team capable of winning multiple games or winning a game, I think, in the postseason based on how they're constructed currently.
And I agree that their future quarterback is not on the team. That's an interesting question for Washington. You're right, Sam Howell is leading in yardage. He's also thrown the ball the most. Next closest, 47 fewer throws is Josh Allen. He has completed over 66% of his passes, has 9 touchdowns. He's second or third, I should say, to Josh Allen and to Mac Jones as far as interceptions are concerned, has 17 touchdowns. And he's been sacked 47 times, and that's a combination. We know it's never just the O-line. It's a young quarterback holding on to the ball too long at times as well. That's an interesting question. If you're a Washington Commander fan or management or anything, are you saying we can win the Super Bowl with Sam Howell as our quarterback? I don't know the answer to that because you figure he's going to get better. It's his first year starting the entire year. You figure he can get better. You got to improve that offensive line in front of him for sure because he's getting the heck smacked out of him in the backfield. That, while I think for sure they go for a new quarterback in Atlanta, I don't know in Washington. I mean, maybe they get somebody else and they have a competition for it, but I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, this is just looking at stats and everything is in stats, that Sam Howell doesn't deserve a really good look for what he's doing this year.
Yeah, well, and I think you're always as faithful as your options at this point. I don't know what Washington's options are going to be like. I think this draft class that we've talked about for quarterbacks coming out doesn't have as much depth as we previously thought in terms of guys that I'm confident being high-end NFL starters. And then the free agent market for quarterbacks this year, I don't know what that would look like, especially now. The scenario I wanted so badly this offseason was if Kirk Cousins had stayed healthy. Yeah. And things had gone well there. And Minnesota was still not going to commit to him long-term because they've ridden this long enough and they want to get off and try something new, is that Washington would open at the close and just bring Kirk Cousins on home to play inside this Eric Bieniemy offense and make everybody here cackle. It's not going to happen now. It probably wasn't going to happen then. But I think Sam Howell's got a pretty good shot of being the guy again going into next year just because I don't really know what else is out there. That was going to require a bigger look. So, Dad, let's put that question to the side and get to the next superlative here, which right on time. Questionable quarterbacks. Whose Week 10 performance made you second-guess their future the most from the quarterback position, Dad, this weekend? I think the low-hanging fruit on this would be Mac Jones or Zach Wilson. Like, Mac Jones is done in New England. That is over. That is cooked. We don't even know if he's going to be the quarterback this week based on what we've heard from Belichick publicly. So that's probably the easiest one. I feel like the one that I've seen people start to kind of raise an eyebrow at is Trevor Lawrence, what that future starts to look like as we get to a season where he's the most talented quarterback prospect of the last, I don't know, however many years. I've seen the discussion pop up about if it was just off the strength of who they were as college players, and you had a guy like Trevor Lawrence up against Caleb Williams and Drake May in this current class, it would be Trevor Lawrence going number 1 overall. period, in my mind, because of the combination of production and physical ability. But we haven't seen it yet consistently translate on the high end in the NFL. And, Dad, I know this is coming after the coaching change early in his career, but I think people are still kind of looking and waiting for more.
So, I'm basing it on the question that's asked. Whose Week 10 performance made you second-guess their future the most? Mac Jones and Zach Wilson, I'd never question their future. It's not. Their future is not the starters or where they are. So that nothing changed there for me. And Will Levis is a rookie. Will Levis came down to earth, and we all knew he was going to come down to earth. So that one didn't make me second-guess anything. It is Trevor Lawrence. I mean, Trevor Lawrence it did not play, 17 of 29, 2 interceptions, no touchdown, albeit against a very good defense. But still, this is a playoff team. You're a playoff team. You're going to have to play well against good defenses. He's got 9 touchdowns and 6 interceptions this year. So to me, it's where what they did in the playoffs last year, we thought, okay, they're ready to elevate and take the next step. Now they're getting kind of hounded by the Texans with a new coach and a rookie quarterback in their division, and they just don't look as impressive as they have at times. So based off how this question is laid out, I would say Trevor Lawrence.
You know what? Trevor's probably in that conversation, but I'm going to change my answer. Derek Carr. Like, between the injury and just the performance so far this season, that has really not turned out the way they thought. You look at the season so far for him, completing about 65% of his passes, which is middle of the road. But outside of his rookie year, this is the lowest yards per completion average he's had in his NFL career. 10 touchdowns against 4 interceptions. And I said the other week, and I stand by, the New Orleans Saints are trying to run the Drew Brees offense with a quarterback that is not Drew Brees at this point. They've had weapons going in and out of the lineup. Michael Thomas banged up again this weekend. A.T. Perry coming on a little bit, but like anything else, football's too complicated for it to be any one person's fault. But I thought this was going to look a lot better with Derek Carr in the New Orleans Saints building going forward. And now I wonder if you can really continue with him as your quarterback beyond this season. Dad, let's go from quarterbacks to coaches, the other player, the spot that gets the most credit. Which coach gets the most credit for their team's success to this point in the season so far, in your mind? We should call this, by the way, the Mike Tomlin Coaching Credit Award, because I don't feel like there's a bigger poster for it right now than the Steelers head football coach.
You sit there and look at now, again, we can pick anybody, but we just threw down like 3 choices, but you can go anywhere. Mike Tomlin, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's Dan Campbell, which is like a 2-year award. And then it's Antonio Pierce, which is a 2-game award, right? And I'll lean toward Antonio Pierce because it's the 3rd time I've done a Raiders game. I've seen them earlier and how bad they were and how bad they looked. And now I've seen them in the 2nd game of Antonio Pierce and talked to some of the players and just the difference in attitude and emotion. Now, how far that will take them, let's see. Because now they beat the Giants and the Jets. Now, the Jets had a good defense, so that was a nice win for them. But now they have Miami and then Kansas City. So this will be more of a real test. But in the immediate, Mike, I'm going to give Antonio Pierce a ton of credit for, just 180ing this team on their want to, their emotion, their joy is a wrong word, their quicker step coming into the facility and preparing because they're excited again. And that's because of Antonio Pierce. So I give him a lot of credit for that. How long it will last, we'll wait and see.
I think joy is the right word. And I think it's similar, as we're going to name this the Mike Tomlin Coaching Credit Award, because, again, nobody has clearly been able to exercise this idea better than Mike Tomlin, who's MacGyvered his way through the post-Ben Roethlisberger portion of his coaching career. But I think with Antonio Pierce, it's similar in the idea, like, what have we seen? Very consistent messaging from him publicly talking about this team since he took over. He's got a very clear idea of how he wants to present this team. I'm sure the messaging he's sending to that team daily mimics that right now. We'll see in the long term, can you cultivate the kind of individual relationships? Can you find that way to motivate once it's against better competition? And obviously, you'll be judged much more if he gets to keep this job on what they do when they get this roster in a better place. But for all intents and purposes. The only other one I'd offer up there, Dad, and it's because we haven't said anything nice about them in a while, Mike McDaniel does still deserve. I mean, he's gotten a ton of credit. It's not like we've been withholding it, but I feel like we haven't said their name in a while because the offense has struggled somewhat. Mike McDaniel has still, in a very short order, come in there, put his imprints all over that team in a pretty adverse situation, and come out on the other side and made their quarterback instantly better and made them contenders, and nobody even blinks twice about it.
I agree, and everybody, you should Google him to find out his story. It is an incredible story of how he got to where he is today, though his team just needs to beat a good team.
They do. But coming up next, we'll get to one of the teams they've beaten and the decisions that lay in front of them at the quarterback position next. My father shovels mini pancakes here on the set.
Yes.
Dad, it feels like you're in white-collar jail doing the show most mornings there. You're out in a separate spot from my mom and the rest of the house. She comes and puts your food by the door for you to eat out here. It does seem like you're in a little bit of like your own bubble.
Your mother's wonderful, as you well know, Mike. I mean, just bringing in the food like that. And yes, it's a wonderful setup here. The dogs come and visit. I'll see them, their little noses up against the glass, wanting to come in and say hi to Dad. So I'll let them in the breaks and we'll hang out a little bit. I'm not going to lie. It's a nice setup. It's a very nice setup. And I'm in Arizona. So the weather is really nice as it's starting to turn cold and wintry in some places. Not here, my friend. Not here. I have zero complaints.
No, life is good out there. Life is less good back on the East Coast right now, where in addition to being cold, you've also got to worry about this. In recent years, it took me a long time, longer than I'd care to admit, to understand what the term gaslighting meant. But now, after years of having therapy words make their way into TikTok and other apps, I figured this out, and I feel like that's what's going on with Robert Saleh and this Zach Wilson situation, where we've gotten to the point where Robert Saleh is trying to gaslight us through the media, talking about his quarterback, because here he was yesterday, not only saying that Zach Wilson will remain the starter for this team in New York, but that he's actually doing okay.
Zach is actually playing pretty good. He's not. He's much better than he was a year ago. He is year one in a new system, a system that was, again, like I said, built for Aaron. Let's be real. And now we're trying to make a shift to get it to where everyone's comfortable with where we are.
Rob Saleh probably needs to be less honest with the media. And I know that's like a bad thing to say because we like it when coaches are giving of answers and honest with the media. But it seems like the spots where, especially in New York, they've gotten in trouble are where he's been honest. Because I believe him, Dad, when he says Zach Wilson is probably better than he was last year. And I believe him when he says this offense was built for Aaron Rodgers. But at this juncture in the season, none of that really matters. And better than Zach Wilson last year, this isn't Matthew McConaughey's Oscar speech where he says, my hero is me 10 years from now. Zach Wilson needed to be a lot better than this period to justify the one next to his name, and he hasn't. And the fact that the Jets are still holding on to him as their starter and not doing anything. I understand this is past the trade deadline, and he can't do anything materially.
Right.
But, Dad, I don't know what more a Jets fan could do in this situation because it seems maddening.
Listen, the most honest Robert Saleh was, we all think, was when he was on with Michael Kay in New York and really didn't have an answer to why Zach Wilson was the starter, right? He kind of hemmed and hawed on that, and I was like, boy, that was probably the most honest we've seen. Because, and what he's doing, listen, he's not alone. You back your guy and try and keep his confidence level up by saying good things about him when you know the ship isn't going very well. And I did this last game, where they lost to the Raiders, and this offense just isn't doing anything. By stats, you look at the last 4 games, of which they're 2-2, by the way. He in only one of those games, did he throw over 60%, have a completion percentage of over 60%, right? I mean, in just the one. And he's had in that time 1 touchdown and 1 interception. For the most part, he's not putting the ball in the end zone, but he's not really turning it over for the season. He has 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. And we've talked about the O-line. I talked about it during the game. It was their 6th O-line combination. You know this better than anybody, Mike, when you start doing that, how you can give up pressure. But I thought their line actually blocked pretty well against the Raiders and Max Crosby in this game. It wasn't all out hell on Zach Wilson in this one. So I think Saleh is saying what he has to, because you don't have him, you're going to Trevor Siemian. Is that going to do anything? We keep saying they didn't do anything when they could have done something. So at this point, I think it's just building confidence as best you can.
I was going to say, I guess I don't know what to do with the Jets at this point, because you're probably right. Like, the most level-headed read of this is you've got a below-average quarterback playing quarterback for you. He was your team's draft pick, and you spent a number 2 overall pick on him, and then you went out to try and replace him. So we know exactly what the Jets think of Zach Wilson. We're all disappointed that, especially with the backdrop of what Minnesota's done with Josh Dobbs, that they couldn't at least do that. Like, if the Jets had Josh Dobbs, Dad, they're a playoff team, right? Like, I think we feel pretty comfortable in saying that if you had made that exact trade where the Arizona Cardinals were clearly ready to deal this guy and you're not even in the same side of football, that you could have made that happen. And had you done that on a loaner for right now, because Josh Dobbs, Dad, would have been the perfect middle ground quarterback for Aaron Rodgers. I get you weren't going to, when we were trying to have all these advanced theories about, well, would they go after a guy like Kirk Cousins when he was healthy? That was never going to fly with Aaron, because that could potentially be longer than that. Josh Dobbs is a hired gun. And so if you had brought him in to hold over until Aaron got back, whenever that was, if it's truly December like Aaron says or not, it would have been the perfect fit for this, for a team that we thought had much more to play for than the Minnesota Vikings at that time. That may not be true anymore. And so now that we're on the other side of that disappointment, Dad, because I think this is where it all stems from, do we just have to watch the Jets being a frustratingly slightly below average team with a great defense that gets wasted, and because they're in New York, they're going to get outsized coverage of that, and we're going to have to try and spin the tires on this every week? It's starting to feel what this is like, because nothing's going to materially change for them.
No, I don't think anything's going to change for them. No, I don't think so, even though we talked about their offensive firepower. Dalvin Cook actually got a few more carries in this Raider game and looked pretty good. You have Breece Hall, had one big catch and run in this game. You have Garrett Wilson, who we like a lot as well. So we see the offensive weapons. The O-line, as we have mentioned, has gone through a number of changes. The musical chairs there has been incredible, starting basically, I think, in week 3. I don't see much changing. You look on the horizon, they have the Bills, who are having their own set of problems. Then they have Miami, who we know struggles against good teams, but Jets aren't really that good team, but they have a really good defense. So we'll see what goes on there. I think that's what we're in for. I think we're in for mediocrity out of them in a season. And that's the tough part, because there were such high expectations, right? Beginning of the season, it was, we're going to the Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers. We got some help, on the offensive side. We have a great defense. Now we have the final piece in Aaron Rodgers. Here we go. And that was taken away from you 4 plays in. So you all of a sudden are scrambling and dealing with that on what do you do at the backup position when you still have a great defense out there, and they stood pat. And we'll look back on that, and we'll all think that was a mistake. It was the decision they made. And I get, once you made it, you're living with it, right? I get coming out and backing Zach Wilson. It's not going to do you any good to pull I don't know who our starter is. I don't know what's going on anymore, because Trevor Siemian is not going to be the answer either. So I think you have to, at this point, just keep backing your guy as much as it's just kind of talk and not reality at this point.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and afford Rob solid grace going forward, because I don't know how much of that decision was in his hands in terms of who they were or weren't going to go out and get there. And now you're right. You're just stuck with the hand that you've got here. The interesting thing is going to be now, I always love the term, and I call it an anxiety bowl. Jets-Bills feels like an anxiety bowl coming up this week based on that Bills loss last night of, if it goes bad, and with this Jets defense, it could absolutely go real bad for this Buffalo offense that's in a tailspin right now. You wonder if that starts to prompt some material change in Buffalo in terms of the staff, like we talked about with Ken Dorsey before.
And by the way, they beat Buffalo already. Now they play them again, and they still have Miami twice. So while we don't expect them to be players in the playoffs, who knows? Who knows the way Buffalo's playing right now, and the Jets defense against the Miami offense we still get to see twice, could make it pretty interesting, I think.
The NFL's so weird this year because of all the quarterback injury. You end up with a bunch of really bad teams, overall bad football teams, that have one good redeeming thing about them that given the right matchup. And this is a league that's so much more matchup based than its college football counterpart, that in any given week you could have something wild happen like that. Where you're right, as you say it out loud, Dad, with the Jets' particular defensive line going up against a Dolphins team, if injuries continue to affect them up front and they're hopefully getting healthier in that spot, yeah, you could see them being a little bit of a fly in the ointment on some of these places. It's a fascinatingly frustrating place to be for the New York Jets, who are going to continue to get talked about publicly for everything they do, because yet again, they are the New York Jets. back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr. Dad, we've talked a lot of football today, so want to come up for air a little bit because technically there are other sports happening right now, even though we don't treat it like that until we get December 25th. Maybe the NCAA or the NBA's midseason tournament will change that. Maybe not. We will see. But what usually does
maybe
change
if the
that
players
is money
buy
coming
into
out
it a little bit.
My favorite thing, and God bless the sideline reporters that are just doing their job, that are asking about this. I saw a game this past week, and I forget who was even playing, but Cassidy Hubbarth was on the sideline and asked the player involved. I know it was the Boston Celtics, and she asked Jason Tatum after the game about, hey, you guys, extra motivation, trying to be one of those teams that makes the semifinals out in Vegas and gets closer to that point. And he just could not have cared less. Like, every time one of these guys gets asked about the play-in tournament, that split second is the first time they're remembering that this was a in-season tournament game. I don't even know what to call it. You didn't brand it with a good enough name, by the way. That's my other biggest gripe with this, Dad, is I haven't seen, is it sold? Like, did they sell the in-season tournament to somebody here? Because I discovered for the first time yesterday, did you know that they were selling rivalry games now in college football?
No, I did not. I saw your tweet about that. I had no idea that they were doing that. And as far as this in-season tournament, a lot of times you're not sure of year one if it's going to click, but you think over time it's going to. I think the only thing here right now is it's going to be accepted. It has to be accepted. It's going to happen. I still am failing to see what good it's doing. I still don't fully understand it. As I'm an NBA fan, but not a diehard NBA fan, but I'm an NBA fan outside of maybe that, because remember, these games all count in the standings, save for, I believe, the semis and the finals. And then kind of like the fourth quarter of the old way they ran the Pro Bowl, where nobody really gave a damn about the game until the fourth quarter if it was close, because you knew you got double the game-winning money than the losing team did, and you could, justify bringing your family and other teammates over in the bar tab and everything because you got the higher amount. That maybe the two teams will care in the championship game because the winners get $500,000 each. I think $500,000 each. But other than that, I don't know what the draw is.
They're trying to get people to care about the NBA's regular season because they want to be able to justify it when they go to the... I'm just telling you, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm telling you that's the goal here, is they're trying to get more people, including the players, interested in the regular season. It's why they went with the players and hammered home all these rules about you got to play X amount of games to be eligible for these postseason awards, is because they want and need these guys to do this, because if they're going to keep asking for tons of money when it comes to negotiating rights deals in the future, they've got to have a product that night in and night out, especially for the primetime games, is something that people actually want to watch.
You have your own people, your own players. It's one thing if they asked the players and they said, oh, I don't like it, or they actually had an opinion about it. Just like, again, in the NFL, the way the Pro Bowl has changed, players will say, I like it, I don't like it, there's an opinion. Mike, the league in my opinion, has to cringe anytime a player is asked because they don't know about it. They don't even understand when one of their games is happening. And that's from the people that are involved in it. So I can't imagine that has to be going over well. And I would imagine the league is sending out memos to the teams about, at least acknowledging the tournament. How bad is it when the league does all this to implement something and players have no idea outside of, oh yeah, there's a trophy next to this game in the schedule, so that means something. I said they should have put a $sign there, knowing that if you win this thing, you get $500,000. That would make the players remember something, not a trophy.
Yeah, it seems like from an execution standpoint, it's been incredibly half-handled by the NBA at this point, because I understand, like I said, the intention. I get where they're trying to go, and maybe we'll get to the semifinals and finals in Vegas, and it'll all crystallize, because now we won't just have weird off-brand courts and different jerseys to signal to us that we're playing an in-season NBA tournament game. But in the meantime, it does seem like that they failed in the messaging with their constituency, and for Adam Silver and company, that's got to be maddening, because this has been his baby in particular for a while. And when the boss wants something to work, usually there's a lot of time and resources spent on making things work for the boss. So by the way, one of the ways to do that, better name. Like, I go back to, I had no idea we were selling rivalry games now in college. The Boeing Apple Cup going on in a couple weeks. They announced Washington Athletics did that the game was sold out. And I saw that, Dad, and apparently, like, Notre Dame sold the Jeweled Shillelagh game with USC. That one's also got a sponsorship. I think DirecTV was on that. So we're in a day and age where college football, the most lawless land that exists. Nobody's running college football. There is nobody in charge of this behemoth that has succeeded because the game in the middle of it is so violent and chaotic, and we got kids watching Christmas movies at halftime. It has succeeded overwhelmingly in spite of itself. And even they looked up and went, cool thing. Let's just sell that and make sure that people know exactly what it is. Brand rivalry games, goofy trophies. Maybe that's what the NBA needs. Goofy trophies. Look at what college football's done and get a trophy that's a rack of ribs for when Memphis plays somebody and start branding it like that to create this added little bit of something there, because so far the branding around this in-season tournament outside of the courts just hasn't worked.
I guess it would start by knowing there's an actual trophy before you even can name it a goofy trophy. And at this point, a lot of players don't even understand when they're playing in a tournament game or the trophy involved.
You know what? And you know what? Honestly, that's the other thing, too. One of the best leadership tactics that we see from anybody, and we see this when coaches take over all the time, give players ownership over this. You needed more player collaboration. Let them design the courts. Let them figure out what they want the prize to be. Let the players vote on where they wanted the Final Four and the championship to be. All this stuff where even if you're going to end up making the decision right away, I'm just spitballing here, trying to do the work for the league office. Dad, let's give credit to the man that we actually wanted to talk about in this segment before we got sidetracked here. As Denver Nuggets head coach Michael Malone has agreed to a contract extension, according to Adrian Wojnarowski at ESPN. We don't have figures on this, Dad, but it says that it is going to make him one of the NBA's highest paid coaches, a source told ESPN. Dad, you've got a list of the highest paid coaches in the NBA. What are we in range for here?
So Greg Popovich is at the top at $16 million a year, and then Monty Williams signed that deal with Detroit, got him a little over $13 million a year.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, good for Monty. Notre Damer, yes. Then you have Steve Kerr making $9.5 million, Spoelstra in Miami making $8.5 million, and Rick Carlisle with Indiana making $7.2. So I got to imagine it's in the range of the upper three, right? The 16, the 13, and the 9, maybe go in the middle there. So he'd probably maybe be second or third. I don't think he's going to be passing Popovich anytime soon. Certainly deserves it as they sit there with the tied for the best record in the West at 8-2. So congrats to him getting the bag. We've been talking about the guy that got the bag we talk about the most now have been Craig Counsell, going from Milwaukee now to the Cubs, making $8 million a year. So Malone is going to, I'm sure, be making well over that. So congrats to him. Quick side note on them, because they're tied, like I said, leading the West. How about this? What was the big storyline before we started in the NBA season? It was James Harden, right? James Harden, I'm never playing in Philadelphia, goes to camp, leaves for 10 days, blah, the whole thing that went on there. And then he finally goes off that team, goes exactly where he wants to go, to the Clippers. I know it's early in the season. I get it. But the team he left and didn't want to be part of, Philadelphia, 8-1, the best record in the East. And where Harden wanted to go, the Clippers, to play with all his 30-something buddies, they're sitting there with the fourth worst record in the West at 3-6. Again, very early. I understand that, but I think there's a lot of people just at this point still kind of smirking at that. Okay, James, you basically cry and whine your way to whatever teams you want. It hasn't worked anywhere, and hey, great start out in LA as well.
Well, and you've got it as the perfect backdrop, because James Harden just couldn't help himself, where he had the quote going into the Clippers where he said, "I'm not a system player, I am the system." When you say something like that, no matter what the sample size is, and things go wrong, guess who we're going to point to? The system. So that, honestly, that should be James Harden's nickname. Like, I know he's been the beard for a long time. We need to add the system to his basketball reference page. Basketball Reference always has this long list of nicknames that no player's ever actually gone by here. I don't know if it's Basketball Reference or just Wikipedia. We need to make sure James Harden is aptly described as the system from now on. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr. here. Going to take you through this, that, and the third. 3 quick stories to send you off on into your day. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us. Leave us that 5-star rating and check us out here live 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on DraftKings YouTube channel, DraftKingsNetwork.com, and Samsung TV Plus. If you miss us there, can't watch us live, you can cheat everything, including our great guests like the SEC Network's own Peter Burns, who joined us to talk some college football today. You can get that wherever you get your podcast or right here on YouTube immediately after the show is done airing at 10 a.m. Eastern. We will get to, in a year full of throwback jerseys that have prompted a lot of controversial takes, one of the most controversial that we could find. After a quick word from our friends at Wrangler, because guys, jeans, shirts, and jackets that are made for the ride of life are what you get with Wrangler. Be ready for the cooler days and longer nights and styles that are going to keep you warm and keep you comfortable moving and looking great no matter where you are. You can wear Wrangler jeans literally anywhere, at work, out at night, playing a pickup game, or with friends at home watching the game on TV. They're that comfortable and that durable, and there's a Wrangler shirt for every occasion. They got casual tees, snaps, and button-ups, or you can layer them together for a little bit of both. And of course, don't forget the iconic Wrangler jackets. When the weather starts to chill and you need to venture out, Wrangler will keep you ready for anything. So add some Wrangler to your getup with jeans, shirts, and jackets that look great, fit great, and move great, so you're always ready for whatever life throws at you. And you can save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order when you use promo code GOJO15. Wrangler, for the ride of life. And Dad, the ride of life takes us back to our move to Connecticut. We moved to Connecticut in 1998 when you were getting ready to start working up full-time at the worldwide leader at ESPN. And right about that time, before we got there, there had been a big exodus from the state. The Hartford Whalers, famed hockey team, had left New England at that point for the greener pastures and become the Carolina Hurricanes. And so now, Dad, we get the announcement yesterday from the Hurricanes that in their February 10th matchup against the Devils, they're going to be wearing the Hartford Whalers throwback. So we've seen this happen, Dad, with the Tennessee Titans wearing the Houston Oilers throwbacks that a lot of people looked at. So how do you view this as some of the silkiest uniforms of all time, some of the best colors and logos ever? I'm glad to see them back on the ice, even if it pains me for some of my Connecticut brethren.
No, I think it's very cool. And I know there are a lot of people like, wait a minute, why are the Titans wearing the Oilers when there's a team in Houston still in the Texans, and don't understand that the team, you know, how that all worked. Here, this Carolina was Hartford. So I think it's very, very cool. The part that we kind of chuckle at is how Hartford so badly, wants a hockey team back, and how badly they keep talking about the Whalers. Of course, if you had shown more interest when they were there, they wouldn't have left in the first place. So that got worked out for them. And they still believe they're going to petition. Remember, Hartford was the same place that petitioned for the Patriots when they thought they were going to move, right? Which I'm sorry. Listen, we lived there for a lot of your life. We lived there, I was there a couple of decades. Gang, it's just not going to happen. You are not getting a professional team. You were never getting the Patriots. They were just using you. And you're not getting an NHL team back in Connecticut. It's just not going to happen. So you can wish it all you want. You can, every now and then you see somewhere in Hartford they're selling the Whalers stuff, which is cool. That's fine. It's a cool uniform, and I'm cool with Carolina doing that. But it's just not going to happen.
Oh, it's not sometimes, Dad. It is all the time. When you go into the airport at Bradley International, you are never going to walk through there, especially towards the end of the Delta Terminal. There's that one shop that always sells Whaler gear. Most of the vintage praise, Hartford Prince, one of my favorite shops downtown, always sells branded Whaler gear. If you go to a concert in the summer, Dave Matthews is the biggest thing Connecticut has to offer each and every summer, because the caucasity is just overwhelming. And you will hear every time a bring back the Whalers chant in the parking lot as people are walking into the arena. It is honestly, Dad, we need to keep the Whalers away from Connecticut, because the personality has so become, we have been jilted lovers for so long that now that's who we are relative to this hockey team. So I'm going to enjoy seeing the uniforms back on the ice. I never actually lived there when the team was in town, but I can understand people feeling some type of way. I just like seeing good uniforms out there. I felt the same way when the Texans wore the Oilers stuff, and I feel the same way now about the Whalers stuff here. You can't get enough good colors and uniform combinations out onto the ice or field for me. I am in support of this. Let's get to that, Dad. We both loved Wedding Crashers, the movie. Obviously insanely popular. In real life, little bit more difficult proposition, and sometimes the results may vary, and that's the case here for a woman in Belden, Mississippi, as Sandra Lynn Henson, a 57-year-old, was arrested at the end of September at a wedding ceremony, taking place in Mississippi. She was caught eating a piece of cake by the bride's sister before she handed over $200 that she had stolen. While family members threatened her, authorities have now tied her to a string of thefts in Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, all dating back to 2019. So, Dad, she's not trying to go and find a one-night stand at these weddings. She's trying to get them to come up off some of this money that people have been giving them as gifts.
Yeah, she got nailed. The $200 she took at this one, she took it out of the purse of the wedding planner. So she's taken it out of purses. In these other states where she's gotten arrested, she's taken it out of the cards she stole presents as well. And she when she got caught here on a notebook, she had a list of 7 other weddings. So, and when she got arrested here, she was pleading for them not to call the police. She said she apologized, and she said, "I've been going to church and door dashing and doing well lately," trying to say, I'm living well now. I'm doing better. Please don't. And then they found out that she was a serial wedding reception thief. Taking all things in these different states. So she got nailed. They got her on video here doing it as well. So, hey, she's giving it a go. Just like in the movie The Wedding Crashers, these guys, they're going to try and pick up women. She's going to try and get cash. So, everybody has their reasons, huh?
It's the perfect crime, especially she's a pretty nondescript looking older white woman at a wedding. Those are a dime a dozen. If it's a wedding with a decent sized number of people, you know this, Dad. As a visitor to a wedding, you're hardly ever going to know everyone. There's always some obscure relative or a friend from a different side of the family that you're not acquainted with. And the bride and groom are so overwhelmed, they're usually never going to get to visit with everybody at the wedding as much as they try. There's so much going on that if you're just unassuming enough and keep to yourself, like the rule says in Wedding Crashers, draw attention to yourself, but only in a positive light if you're going to do so, it really is the perfect place to do crime.
Imagine if she stole cards, took the money out, and then put the cards back so it wouldn't look like those were missing. And then she didn't get caught at that reception. Bride and groom are opening their cards later and go, "Man, Uncle Joe's cheap. He didn't leave us any money. Man, Aunt Mary didn't leave us a thing. What's going on? Why isn't anybody leaving us any money?"
I would like the idea of this woman going and doing this and then giving the money away right after and purely doing it kind of like they talk about in The Dark Knight. Some people just want to watch the world burn. She just wanted to sow seeds of discontent among family members at these weddings on the happiest days of their life. Dad, speaking of crimes, let's get to the third. We had the headline after Colorado played at UCLA about jewelry being stolen from the Colorado football team's locker room. Thousands of dollars of jewelry taken from the locker rooms that now, according to Pasadena police detectives, the initial report says that it's believed to be recruits that were there on a visit. High school recruits that are the confirmed suspects tied to the theft. Dad, I don't know how much has changed in recruiting between when I was coming up and now, but I'm pretty sure stealing from the current team is probably not a good way to ensure that your spot on the team is going to be ready.
Yeah, I would say that those recruits will no longer be offered. And let me tell you, if this starts going through the circles of recruiting of what it could cost those players, it brings up the questions, how are they unsupervised or alone in the locker room as well? I mean, it's a horrible thing to have happen, but I mean, you guys went through trips way before I did. Were you ever left alone in a locker room during a game where there wasn't security around? That seems awfully odd for them to kind of have the run of the locker room to steal stuff like that.
Yeah, there's always wiggle room and middle ground in these places where stuff gets lost in translation. Kind of like we talked about with wedding. Game day's a busy environment, so another place tailor-made for crimes. But I would remind you, if you are a prospective recruit, you want to play college football, get your education paid for, potentially get some of this NIL money, I would recommend not stealing from the current players on the team. That's just free advice, free game that we're trying to give you. If you enjoyed any of the free game we gave you today, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us a 5-star rating. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.